So first of all, it's nice to be back on my JMU roots for my PhD. So as you probably guessed from this, a lot of my research is in physical activity promotion and decreasing sedentary behaviour. So I thought to give you a brief sort of context, rather than me talk away for ages and it would last a longer time, I'm just going to show you a brief video to set the scene.
In the workplace today, there is a silent killer. It is one of 10 major causes of disability. It is utilised more than anything else in your office. It increases your chances of contracting over 25 chronic diseases. Every person in your office is at risk. It is a leading cause of diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. You are probably using one right now. It is a more immediate economic threat than global warming. Are you sitting down? Reach your killer.
Okay, so hopefully that set the scene a little bit. What we do is we try and decrease sedentary behaviour, and this is defined as an energy expenditure less than 1.5 METs. So what we mean by METs is the energy that I take simply to just exist, so our metabolic processes, is 1 MET. So 1.5 times that amount of energy, which isn't a lot, is classed as sedentary behaviour, and that links into this area. So we want to essentially decrease the amount of sedentary behaviour and increase our different intensities of physical activity. And up until recently, we had no guidelines whatsoever for the amount of time we spent sedentary. And then in 2011, the Department of Health came up with that we need to minimise the amount of time we spend in sedentary behaviour. Well, it tells us absolutely nothing. We knew that. So unfortunately, we still use the Canadian guidelines here, which tells us a little bit more, and it gives a little bit more detail in terms of specifics, in that we need to spend less than 2 hours a day with screen time. But unfortunately, work life for adults, school time for children, we are excessing this amount of behaviour. And this leads into physical activity. And this is defined as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles resulting in energy expenditure. So again, any simple movement that we do above resting, so simply existing, is physical activity. So you'd think that's quite easy to achieve. So how much of this activity do we actually need to do to get the health benefits associated with it? So we find that adults need to engage 5 days a week in 30 minutes moderate to vigorous physical activity. And for children, it's slightly more, it's 60 minutes moderate to vigorous physical activity every day. And when I say moderate to vigorous, it's a bit subjective, because what I class as moderate might be different to someone else, and that depends completely on fitness. But essentially that means that you've got an increased heart rate and you're slightly out of breath, but you can still engage in conversation whilst doing activities. So we're simply asking people to engage in between 30 minutes and an hour of activity every day. Not a great deal, but yet hardly anyone actually engages in this. And in fact, research shown in 2007, there was a large-scale project done, the European Youth Heart Study, and a great professor found that as little as 2.5% of children actually meet these physical activity guidelines. So we're having growing concern about the amount of health benefits associated with this. So I thought, seeing as I was coming back to Liverpool, I'm going to use some local data today. So this is actually the Wirral, and it's showing the BMI of 3-year-olds. We look at the blue, this is in SDS BMI fifths. So essentially we're looking at 5 different depths of BMI. We're going from blue being the thinnest, right the way through to the bright red, which is the fattest. And as you can see, as we develop right across the years, we can see that essentially our society is getting far fatter, and that's just a matter of a few years. And we need to think about ways of changing this, because even our pets are getting fatter. It's not just us, it's our pets as well. We've got 50% of cats and dogs in the UK are overweight. But what's worrying is 76% of the owners think that their pets are actually normal weight. And that's quite similar with humans. And the idea of this is that because everyone else is gaining weight, we're actually seeing normality as changing. Therefore, they're not overweight. But the problem is, everyone's changing so much so, but we're not actually changing the health benefits associated with it. So our perceptions are changing. And again, context to Liverpool. Liverpool opened Britain's first animal fat clinic back in 2005. So it is a concern even for pets. So essentially, this is a really simple message that we need to move more and sit less. Really simple. And we've got researchers decreasing sedentary behaviour, we've got other ones trying to increase physical activity, but this area here is really unexplored in terms of a light physical activity. The problem with this is these two behaviours coexist. So even those really vigorously active people, those who train, elite athletes, they train intensely, half the time they're so tired from the training they go home and then they're sedentary the rest of the day. So even although they've got the health benefits associated with vigorous physical activity, they've got the detrimental health benefits associated with high amounts of sedentary behaviour. So we need to work out ways that we can actually tap into this light physical activity area. Problem with that is that technology is evolving so much through time. We've gone through from these hunter-gatherer days, back where we had to go and fight for our food. We had to find our food, we're really active getting it, and when we did get it, it was far more nutritious than we've got now. Now we've evolved right the way through the time. We don't have to worry about even walking to get food now. We can sit in our car, go to a drive-through and get the most unhealthiest food we require with minimal movement. We can simply just put a hand out the window and pay, get the food, and then we can sit down and eat it as well. And again, in the work context, we've gone from days a bit like the Amish community still do, where we're really active and we're doing hard labour-intensive jobs, but now we can just sit there and press a button on a computer and that does all the work for us. So we need to think of ways of trying to reverse this. And again, technology is evolving through time, where even as little as 20 years ago, we had these big old-fashioned TVs and we were quite slim. And now we've evolved through time where we're a bit bigger, but it's all right because TVs are a lot thinner. So then we sit down, we watch our nice flat screen TVs, and we tend to associate that with higher calorific food. And then when we do watch the TV, we watch other people on the TV watching TV. So I'm not saying that this, is a bad thing, because it's a great program as well, but just trying to set the scene here. And then we have the whole thing that it's not safe to do anything. 60% of travel in cars is actually less than a mile in distance. And we're saying it's not safe for our children to walk. Well, if everyone then started walking instead of taking the car, then the roads would actually be safe for our children to go and walk to school. But getting that into place is really difficult. What is good on this, I'm not sure if you can see from the light, is the fact that some people have actually stood up outside of the cars. So at least they're engaging into light physical activity here. Now, I'm not condoning you walk down Britain's biggest car park, the M25, but there are ways that you can start to integrate walking into your lifestyles. One of my favourite things, and probably one of my pet hates here, this was when I was travelling in Thailand, about to go on a really long haul flight, so sedentary for hours, which I absolutely detest. And every single one of these people here, they've all checked in, they're about to go on a long haul flight, and I know that because I've checked. I had a lot of time. So this just shows you that not one person uses the stairs, they've got no luggage, they've checked it in. And just so you don't think that's just one moment in time, I did take a couple of pictures. So then we get into the bit where there are some people who are active, they're going to be active, fantastic. But even then, our mindset's that we still take the easy option. One of the main things people do is the fact that time is a barrier to physical activity. Well, is it quicker to walk up and down the escalator or stand still on it? So again, we come back to this health and safety conscious thing. It's not safe for our children to go outside and play. I used to get the stories of my grandparents. They went out first in the morning, nobody knew where they were, they came back in the evening because it was tea time and everyone was fine. Problem is now we've got the media who publicises all these detrimental things that happen. Again, in Thailand, a school playground, so active, let me walk in, ask me to come in and teach the children. That would never happen here. Different people, when we were working here at JMU, went out to do data collection for a PhD. We had to put hazard tape across a wire to do a bleep test and cones and warn children to step over the wire. We just couldn't get away from this. So that takes us into the elms of, okay, well, we'll let our children stay inside and be safe and play on computer games. But again, this has got a lot of media attention in terms of being related to obesity. And we come back to the history of technology here. So we did actually start, it follows a similar trend in that we started by standing playing video games over here, and then we progressed through time to sitting down, being really sedentary, but now we've got this new realm of active video games. So maybe there's an opportunity here to actually get people to engage in these and combat obesity. And the first of this research started in LJMU in 2008 with Gareth Stratton, Lee Graves over in Sports Science. And as you'd expect, you find that when you engage in these active gaming, you expend far more energy expenditure than simply just using your thumbs. But we link it up, it's nowhere near comparable to actually doing the real thing. But it may be a way to start to get people into activities. So with this in mind, and taking my research a little bit further at Swansea University, we've got this immersive world that we're talking about, that making this holodeck. So when you're engaging in activity, all your walls around you are actually part of your game, so you can be far more interactive in gaming, which is a good thing, that we can get people really engaged in it and actually progress from light physical activity right the way through to perhaps moderate and vigorous. So again, here at JMU, we started on a project with sedentary behaviour, finding out what their body positions were in at which locations. So we had the participants, 2 students actually for the dissertations, wearing monitors, and that transmitted automatically back to database at JMU. This is the monitors here, so again, this is just in the test phase, they're quite bulky monitors. But we had 3 positions. You've got your standing, which would send back a binary code of 0, 0. We'd have sitting, which is 1, 0, and then lying, which is 1, 1. And from that, by the binary code, we know exactly what position that person's in, but from putting different nodes in their flat, we can tell exactly where they are. So if they're stood or down here, we know the distance between all the different nodes, and we can tell what body position they're in. So again, we need to advance this. So luckily enough, I'm based in the College of Engineering within sports science, and we've developing this new tag. We're actually used to measure physical activity using an accelerometer, which is quite bulky, and it measures once every 5 seconds. Children are so sporadic in behaviour, the fact that they'll be doing something and then they'll see a bird and they'll run off and go that way, and they change direction all the time. So this actually measures every 40 hertz, which is basically 40 times a second. We can work out how active they are. So we needed to test this. So what we're doing at the moment is thinking, well, if we can use the Kinect to get people more active, why can't we measure how active they are as well whilst using it? So using that as a research tool. So what we've got here is we would put 10 other tags on our participant, knowing exactly what they're doing at what time. And this is used pattern recognition, but also it does structured light analysis. So we can tell the depth of motion. So essentially, the blurrier something is, the further it is away, and then the darker it is represented on this. So from this, we can work out all the anatomical positions, exactly the position that they're in, and then we get some data back, which quite frankly looks pretty horrific. But this is when we hand it to computer scientists, and they can look at it, and they use something called pattern recognition. So in theory, a random pattern comes up, and we can compare that to the video. So at that precise moment in time, they might be jumping slightly on one leg, and we know the intensity. If that pattern then became bigger, but exactly the same pattern, we know it's with a greater intensity. And when we have indirect calorimetry, so a mask over them that measures the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide they take in and out, we can work how much energy they're expending at that exact moment. So in theory, where we're taking this is putting this out into the school playground now, and we don't have any videos, but in theory, these patterns emerge, and we can tell what time they're doing things and exactly what they're doing. So a far more accurate way of measuring physical activity. So perhaps the future is to integrate what we've got here at JMU, what we're trying to take forward in Swansea, in terms of our sedentary behaviour, in conjunction with this physical activity behaviour, and then have real-time feedback. But the problem here is that ethical? What distance do we have to go to measure how active people are and to get them more active? Is it a case of we're watching people too much now? Or is it a case that we're not watching them enough? Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Can I just ask, what do when you go out to talk to children or to do this research with children, do you think that nowadays children don't know how to do physical activity like we used to do, or do you think they don't want to do it?
It's a really good question. If you think back to years ago, because there wasn't this health and safety real concerns, children went out and they used to climb trees, they used to engage in lots of different things, and they would do what we call fundamental movement skills. So they knew the basic skills, they'd go out, and because they knew that, they had competency in it, which then meant they would actually do it in play. Children, if you're not competent in something and you're not used to doing it, you tend not to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy something, you're not going to actually do it. Actually, Joe Frost's Super Nanny had a programme on not that long ago that LJMU were involved in, and they found out that if you look back 20 years ago, the children's competency in fundamental movement skills of throwing, catching, jumping, hopping was far greater then than it is now, because we've gone to this society where everything's got to be safe and it's structured. So they tend to do more sports now, but less physical activity in terms of play, which means that it tends to be the more affluent families that can afford to take them there or can afford the equipment to do it, whereas those more deprived ones, they've actually got more skills because they tend to just have to make do with what they've got in their surroundings.
Okay, interesting. Does anyone else have any questions?
I just thought this takes it a little bit of a different direction, but already thanks for setting the precedent that our talks probably won't be able to lengthen your lifespan. So I'm really interested in what you've said about children and playing, as Sue says, in terms of the government's new initiatives of wanting to bring competitive sport into schools, which is almost going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
Because if you're not very good at something and you're forced into a competitive environment, you're not necessarily going to enjoy it more, are you? So I was just really interested. I wondered how you see that kind of research that you do in relation to how things are developing with the curriculum at the moment at schools and in terms of Victorian policies. Really.
Yeah, this is the thing, and a lot of interventions we look at and we think they're not very successful, but I then bring that back to the research methods in terms of, well, is it that they're not successful, or is it that our methodology isn't valid and reliable? So how can we assess how accurate something is if we haven't got an accurate tool to actually measure it? In terms of sports, you're right, it's going to promote the kind of people who've got the competencies already and already engage in things, and then put away the people who don't really want to do it. A lot of the things that we're doing in terms of, at the moment, for interventions is my PhD was surrounded around a curriculum, a healthy eating and physical activity promoting curriculum. And, to a certain extent, that's going to work, but then you've got to try and get people actually actively engaged in this. So we're going along the lines of, well, does visual give them more incentive? We've gone through this, making it fun and exciting for them. So in one of the schools in Wales, we've got something called Mission Possible, and they've got employed a company to come in, and they had a free runner going around all the school playground on CCTV, and the grainy effect, and it was like, your mission is to, and then you'd have all the different missions. And we've got what's called, it's almost like a massive long strip, LED strip with coloured lights, and it might be that if you complete your mission and you do more steps each day, these LED lights change colour, or the speed of them. So as you're doing a little bit of activity, so in the classroom it might be red colour and it's going really slow, but after lunchtime when they come back in, we've got these little Fitbits that update on the school Wi-Fi system. They come in and then the lights start flashing really fast and changing colour, so they know how active they've been. At the moment it's just in case of, I know that it's having an effect because they're excited and everything about it, but it's right in the middle of data collection, so I can't tell you what the outcome is for that. But we are going along those kind of routes at the moment.
Any other questions?
Do you see a differential between young girls and young boys in terms of the activity? And
Yeah.
I can see as teenage girls getting
Yeah, exactly. Nail on the head there.
doing exercise.
You get from the stage when you're younger, there's not that much difference in terms of activity status between them. What they engage in is far different. Young boys tend to engage in play fighting, things like that, where girls were just running around and doing different things. But then you progress through and you get to the maturation status, so when they hit puberty. It has a completely different effect on boys than it does on girls. When boys hit maturation, if they're an early maturer, I always compare this to the likes of Nelson and The Simpsons. So you put on a lot of muscle mass straight away and you're predisposed to sports like rugby. So they're actually got an advantage because they've matured early. Late maturing males still got an advantage for sport because they've had longer to grow, which means they're taller, they've got less lean mass, but then they're more predisposed to the likes of endurance running. Females, early maturing females, they tend to unfortunately just be put out of things. They're embarrassed about their bodies, it tends to happen really early on before anyone else, and they're not very competent with things they do, and they withdraw from society. They don't want to be engaged in it. And a lot of the things people do, it's just if people can see them and they're self-conscious, it's called social physique anxiety, which means they don't want to engage in it. A good thing about active video gaming and some of the things that came out in my more qualitative work was that because nobody else could see them doing it, they were happy to actually be active because they could engage in it. And one of them even stated that they played the tennis game, felt that they're quite competent with it, and then went outside and actually did it, which is exactly what you want. And again, but late maturing females tend to be predisposed to sport because they stay into it for longer and gain the skills. So that's a really difficult area to tap into in terms of trying to stop that process.
I think you partially answered my last question though. I know you've gone in, you and Gareth have gone into hundreds of schools and done lots of research and engaged with lots and lots of children. Do you have any evidence that and not from your research obviously, but that's changed the attitudes of schools or changed the attitudes of children in terms of activity and you have
in terms of
an impact?
Yeah, I mean, even from the first schools you work in, you can almost predict which schools are going to have the change. Jen and I worked on the same PhD project, and you go in, if you get the right person in the right school, the right teacher, and it's usually the younger ones, the ones who've got a sports science background who've then gone into primary school teaching or teaching elsewhere, because they're enthusiastic about it, that massively comes across the children. And again, they tend to be the people who are probably more competitive as well, so they're trying to encourage the children to do it. Again, if you go into school and there's somebody who's like, well, this is how they do it, this is what's in the curriculum, we don't really, they're a bit reluctant to change. And then you're almost fighting a losing battle, because you can go in, you can do it, and you can make as much impact as you like, but then if they haven't got these role models to support them. And it's the barrier that we find as parents, in the fact that you can teach them everything, you can get them, tell them to be active and go outside and play and, to eat nutritious meals, and they go home and get sat in front of the TV with burger and chips. And, it's got to be reinforced at all levels. But that's, it's how you actually go into that and fight against it, really.
Interesting. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.